Good evening. How's everybody doing? So great to be here. I really appreciate the opportunity to come here and share some thoughts with you and tell our story to you. You know, I've had the pleasure of coming to events at the Atlanta Press Club in the past. I've always enjoyed it, heard some great speakers, and it's a true honor to have the podium here for a minute or two. So, as you know, and as has been noted by Gene, my real job is that I'm a musician. I'd like to tell you a little story about that, how I learned to play the piano and come to be a professional musician. I learned by listening to my mother. Now, Mom was not a professional. She wasn't a teacher or anything like that. But we had a piano in the house, and she played for family enjoyment. And she was pretty good, you know. So now I was the baby of the family. And my brother and sister, when I was very young, 5, 6 years old, were off in school. My dad out working, and often it was just me and Mom in the house. So I loved listening to her play, and I'd tug on her skirt and say, "Mama, come play me something," you know, and she would oblige. And sometimes she would get me up there and say, "Well, Chuck, you do something, you know, you show me something, you know, make up a little melody." And she would show me some chords and little simple melodies and things. And finally, you know, after a year or so, I was really enjoying this, and I was starting to learn the instrument pretty good. And I had this epiphany that this is what I wanted to do for the rest of my life. Made up my mind. I said I wanted to be a musician. And I was so excited. I was about 7 years old, and I went to find my mother and tell her about this. So I found her in the kitchen, went through the house, and I said, "Mama, Mama." She said, "Wow, Chuck, you're all worked up, son. What's going on?" I said, "Mama, I've made a big decision." And she said, "Well, take a deep breath and just tell me what's on your mind." And I said, "Mama, I've decided I want to be a musician when I grow up." And Mama smiled, looked down at me, and she said, "Honey, you can't do both." Boy, was she right. Hey. I'm still struggling with that two-word phrase, responsible adult. I'm not sure about that. You guys know the difference between a musician and a municipal bond. Municipal bond eventually matures and makes money. But this evening, I'm not here in my capacity as a musician, but in my capacity in my other roles in life, in particular, my interest in the environment, but also as a forest landowner and as a tree farmer. So what in the world is a rock and roll piano player going around talking about these things? And what in the world is he doing partnering with an advertising and public relations guru to put together an environmental website called the Mother Nature Network? Well, there's a simple answer for all of this, a very logical answer. It's all my wife's fault. Rose Lane, my wife Rose Lane's family have been connected to the land for generations as farmers, as tending cattle, tending forest land. And also just as being good stewards of the land, having a passion and a respect for the land. And by the way, Rose Lane was going to be here tonight, but she got a little ill and she couldn't make it. But I like to brag on her and talk about her. She's my better three-quarters, I like to call her. My partner in crime. And by the way, we will have, well, this year, we celebrated our 38th wedding anniversary. That's not too bad. Thank you. And we get a lot of comments about that. People say, "Wow, 38 years, you're in the entertainment business, divorce rate's high. How in the world have you done that? What's your secret?" And I tell folks, well, it's really very simple, because marriage is much like photographic film. It has to be developed in the dark. So when I was dating the farmer's daughter back in the early 70s, and as we began to get serious, the time came that I had to go and meet the farmer and the family. And as you guys might imagine, I was a 20-year-old young hippie rock and roll piano player with hair down to here and a beard. And I was more than a little bit nervous that day. Fortunately, it all did work out quite well, and Rose Lane's family welcomed me with open arms, if perhaps with some curiosity and more than a little bit of concern, I'm sure. But going back even further than that, those of us that are children of the 60s, I think we all remember the cultural and social revolution that was going on during those days. And certainly environmentalism was a part of that. And I think that was probably my first awareness. Remember the time smokestacks were spewing horrible things out into the air. Factories and manufacturing companies were putting terrible things into our waterways, our rivers, our oceans. And there was quite a protest against these things. And I think to a degree those protests brought about some very positive change. The EPA was born. Rules and regulations came into place. And I think there was just a new attitude towards our environment. So that attitude lay dormant just a little while as I was pursuing my musical career until I met Rose Lane and met her family. And as we would go out to the place, to the country, on the weekends and holidays and spend time with them, and I got to know them better, their love and passion and true respect for the land began to rub off on me. And then in 1981, Rose Lane's grandmother passed away, leaving her about 1,000 acres of land and a house that we called the home place. Now it became our responsibility to carry on this heritage, generational heritage of stewardship of the land. And I did not take this lightly, although I must admit I didn't know a lot about it. I was unprepared, and so I decided I'd better prepare myself, and I took a little self-education journey. I wanted to do the right thing by the family, the right thing by the land. And so I went to the library and I checked out books on land use. I went to landowners and I asked them what they were doing about with their land and why they were doing it that way. Went to meetings and seminars, eventually enrolled in a correspondence course when I was touring with the fabulous Thunderbirds. A little, some of you might recall a Texas blues band. They had a hit record called Tough Enough. Remember that? All right. And so I worked with the T-Birds for about 1.5 years, and that's about how long it took me to get through this correspondence course. I would do the homework in the back of the bus or in the dressing rooms or wherever I had the chance to do so. And when I finished it, I began to have a bit of confidence in understanding land use and issues. And we had discussed a number of things to do with the land. You know, it was a diversified farm. They had row crops, they had cattle, and they had some timberlands. But I kind of realized that the row cropping, the cattle, and we looked into other options like pecan trees, peach trees, nursery stock. But all of those things were going to require a lot of day-to-day work on my part. And we couldn't really afford to hire a manager, and we wanted to do this ourselves anyway. But the more I read and learned and studied on forestry, I just became fascinated with it. For one thing, it did fit my situation. I could pursue my career as a musician. It doesn't require so much day-to-day work. And it's a very long-term view of the use of the land, and I kind of like that idea. And I had to remind myself where that marvelous thing called a piano comes from that's given me my career and my livelihood, from the resource of wood. So many other musical instruments come from that resource, as we all know. And trees and forests do so much more for us. They give us materials to build our homes and schools and churches and offices. They give us materials for books and magazines and newspapers. And there are some 5,000 products that we all use that have some element of trees in them. And they do more than that. They clean our air. They clean our water. They provide home and shelter to all manner of wildlife. And they do something else, too, for all of us, I think. They give us a wonderful place to repose and to think about our lives. Ralph Waldo Emerson once so eloquently said that in the woods we return to reason and faith. So Rosie and I decided that this would this would be our mission and our use of the land. We began to manage our land, plant some trees, and manage not only for the trees but for the biodiversity that exists on the landscape. And this led to some advocacy work. The first book that I put out, which is called Forever Green, The History and Hope of the American Forest, because I felt there was a lot of misunderstanding about forest management in the country, and I wanted to try to put an honest face on it, where we've been, where we are, and where we're going. And that led to a children's book, The Tree Farmer, which is a lot of fun to me, and then to the more recent release that they have here tonight called Growing a Better America, which addresses smart growth, the fact that we have 310 million people in this country, 400 million by 2040 or before, and all this tremendous pressure on our natural lands, and some loss of our natural lands due to that pressure, and how we might be able to deal with it, of course, is the subject of that book. And you know, as I would